My name is Hamish Mackie. I'm a British sculptor. I quite often get asked about how do I make my sculptures, so I've decided to make a film explaining the process. Here it is. Near my studio in Oxfordshire, we have roe deer. Which I've spent many happy hours observing and photographing. Watching and studying my subject in their natural environment gives me a real idea as to what they're about. So once I've got all the research from the field in my head, I then bring the information back to my studio and the sculpting begins. Armatures are so significant to the sculpting process. It's almost more important than the sculpting. It has to be anatomically correct and strong enough to support the weight of the clay. If I get the armature wrong at the beginning, the whole sculpture doesn't work. The armature is a frame which I make by arc welding a skeleton out of steel, which I then wrap in aluminium and copper wire so that the clay has got something to grip onto. The next stage of the process is blocking out the shape using clay. Once it's loosely blocked out, I start thinking about the anatomy. Then from here, every piece of clay needs to have a reason. It needs to be doing something. It needs to represent a muscle, a tendon, a bone, what is soft, what is hard, and every single piece is doing something. So when it comes to doing the details of a sculpture, this is where I start to try and bring the sculpture to life. And doing things like the details around the eye, I think really help make a sculpture feel alive. My challenge as a sculptor is to bring life out of a cold, wet clay. Not only do I want my sculpture to be anatomically correct, I also want it to portray the soul of my subject. I want you to look at my sculpture in the eye and see life. When the clay original is finished, it goes to the foundry for mold making. So at the foundry, I store the molds. There's a whole building dedicated to mold storage. The building is pretty full, and actually When we finish an edition of a sculpture, the old moulds get destroyed, so it's always revolving as old moulds go out and new sculptures come in. But it's weird walking into this building, which it has basically a lifetime's worth of my work in it. I always like arriving at the foundry. It's a building which from the outside is just an agricultural farm building. It's fairly unassuming. But I love the fact that inside it's full of 17 highly skilled craftsmen, most of whom I've grown up with. And they're working on an ancient technique that hasn't really changed much in about 6,500 years. From my positive clay original, the next stage is to make the negative mould. The mould is made of flexible silicon rubber encased in a rigid fiberglass jacket, capturing all the fingerprints and form of the sculpture. I don't really need to have a conversation with the foundry about how they're going to cast the bronze. I leave it to them, as they're the experts. But occasionally it's important to talk about how I plan the engineering of a sculpture, how it's actually going to physically stand. Good foundries should be able to give me back in bronze what I gave them in clay. When the mould making team have finished the negative mould, it's pulled off the clay and cleaned. It is then painted up, put together and flushed with a hot wax to produce a roughly 5 mm thick positive cast. This wax is then worked to remove the seam lines where the mould sections fitted together. We don't want to see the seam lines in the finished bronze. The wax is then sprued with a series of runners and risers, which are pipes that allow the bronze to be poured in and the gases to come out. From the wax room, we now move into the ceramic room, where the positive wax is coated in liquid ceramic. The ceramic shell is eventually what we pour the bronze into. The ceramic investment is built up in many layers to make a strong case over the wax. You'll see pins sticking out which hold a ceramic core inside the wax. This is how we make the bronzes hollow. And now for the fun part, we move into the furnace room. The wax is now melted out of the ceramic to make space for the bronze, hence the term lost wax. A process which has been around without changing much for about 6,500 years. I love that. So when the bronze is actually being cast and we're in the furnace room, it's not like boiling a kettle. You're dealing with a crucible of 60 kilograms of molten bronze, and the whole thing has to be choreographed so that you get the ceramic shell heated up. That's got to get into the sandpit before it gets too cool. The bronze then has to be at the right temperature. And the two foundrymen have to pick up the crucible, which, it weighs 60 kilograms, and this is quite a physical thing, and then carefully and accurately they have to pour it into the ceramic investment. It's a fantastic thing to watch. When the bronze is cooled, the ceramic shell is removed to reveal the positive bronze. This sounds easy, but at this stage the ceramic is as hard as a cup. We use hammers, a high-powered pressure washer, and even a quick dip in an acid tank, all the time being really careful not to mark the bronze. At this stage the sculpture is still in lots of sections, so it now has to be pieced together in the chasing room. This is a highly skilled process, as I want the bronze to look exactly like my clay original. This is one of the signs of good quality casting. And it's one thing for me to stick my fingers into wet clay, it's another to reproduce this in a cold hard metal. Part of what makes good quality casting is not being able to see where it was all put together. So really good welding and invisible chasing. The chasing puts back my texture over the weld lines. The raw bronze is now ready for patination. Patination is a way of colouring the bronze using chemicals and heat. I start by making the whole sculpture black. Which is rubbed back to expose the raw bronze, highlighting the surface depth. Then, using various different chemicals, I colour the bronze as a painter would a canvas. Making a bronze sculpture using the lost wax casting method means making your positive original, which goes to a negative mould, from which comes the positive wax, which forms the negative ceramic, and then back to the positive bronze. From the initial inspiration of seeing a foundry group of 3 row in the field to the finished sculpture took around 6 months, and here are the results.